so last year we decided to go for our first festival bottling, and in partnership with Luvians and James Eadie, independent bottlers, we bottled our first Fife Whisky Festival release, I guess. So we have Vince from Luvians, all-round whiskey legend, and Hugh from James Eadie, I guess all-round whiskey legend, who are going to talk us through the Cameronbridge. So Vince, maybe if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I just need to unmute. But hi everyone, I hope everyone's having a lovely evening, and very much looking forward to sort of talking you through our first ever exclusive bottling, and as you just said there, the Fife Whisky Festival bottling. But I think Vince is going to start off talking about the history of Marsala, and then I'll go on and talk more about James Eadie. So it's a bit of a history lesson from Vince to start off with, and then I'll come in at the end.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening, all. My first encounter that I remember, it might have been before, but I remember I was 6 years old, and my mother used to make me zabaione. Zabaione, for those that don't know, is or are egg yolks with lots of sugar, beaten and beaten and beaten. And then, even though I was only 6 years old, there'd be a little bit of Marsala added to it. And this was great for bringing up children. It fortified them, it got them going for the day. My other connection with Marsala is I spent 6 years in Sicily, not in Marsala itself, but in Messina. And there's a wee connection there because Marsala, it was important for Italy because it was where Garibaldi arrived from the north. Okay, from the north, he landed in Marsala and picked up the start of his 1,000 red shirts on his march. And he actually then embarked from Messina on the way north. Now, Marsala had been around for quite a while as a wine, and it's made up, there's white Marsala and there's also Rubino, red Marsala. The white one is made from 3 different grapes, Catarato, Insolia, and I'm trying to remember the other one, and I can't at the moment, but it will come back to me. And it's made in a similar way to sherry or port. It is fortified. But because it is in Sicily, there's a very high sugar content, natural sugar content in the grapes, so they didn't have to be fortified too much. And it's also produced in a way similar to the, not port, but certainly sherry, the Solera method. So you will have old wines in there as well. It's called ad perpetuum, so in perpetuity, big casks, probably not as many as the Solera in bodegas in Spain, but bigger ones, and they would draw off from this. And the red one would be done the same way, give it a different flavor. 2 basic kinds of, really, there's dry and the sweet. The dry usually, although I'm looking at the sweet one in front of me, which is 5 years old, the dry one is usually a lot older. It's almost a vintage, and it's very, very different from this sweet one. So how did, and obviously, not obviously, I should have said, I spent 6 years in Sicily teaching at the University of Messina, and I really didn't drink wine, but I got to taste lots of things. People would love to invite me because I wouldn't drink, but I would taste and talk about things. They really wanted to know about Scotch whisky. And there's my first connection, if you want, really with Marsala and James Eadie, this bottle here. Marsala took off really in the very early 1800s. Some of you will know this from history, that Nelson he had his fleet in the Mediterranean. This was during the Napoleonic Wars. And he stopped in Marsala in about 1800 and picked up lots of Marsala and thought, this is very fine stuff, we'll have it. So he placed the first big order for the UK, which is about 500 pipes, which is a hell of a lot of Marsala. Remember, this is 1800, and the people there, it was Florio, the people, the family Florio, who were shippers, and amongst other things, the just shipped merchants all over the place. And they got in with a couple of English people. The big names are Woodhouse and Ingham. and they set up business there. There were, in the old day, even during wars and things, there were merchants all over the big cities. They tried to keep the peace. They hated war, but there were merchants, for example, just a little aside, at the height of Byzantium, Constantinople, there were 100,000 foreigners all there, but most of them were merchants. But coming back to Marsala, the first big order was of 500 pipes, and some wag said, well, the Battle of Trafalgar was won because the British sailors were fortified with Marsala. So good stuff, you know, that. My connection to Sicily, I'm reading my script here, is that I spent 6 years, I'm not Sicilian, I'm from further north between Rome and Naples, but I spent 6 very, very happy years in Sicily. And Fife's connection to Marsala and Italy, well, that's me. I've been in the whiskey business for about 38 years, and being in this part of the world, a very, very popular whiskey was Cameronbridge. Now, this was the normal stuff, but I learned that the Cameronbridge in all the local pubs and whatnot, it wasn't really so much further afield. It was all for the miners' clubs and the workmen's clubs. And it always had a very, very good age. And when I first tried it in about 1984, I thought, this is bloody good, because it wasn't the 8-year-old I had tried. It was a 12-year-old, which had come from the foreign market, and it was absolutely delicious. So this takes us forward to why we chose Cameronbridge. A little bit of marketing if you want, because it's down the road. We're local, they're local. And with James Eadie, we got some samples, and I chose this one. And I really like this one because I think grain whiskies take age every bit as well as single malts, and sometimes even better. Some people say they don't acquire the complexity, but I wrote down some notes here from the one I poured. I poured it for an hour, and I'm smelling it now. And I've got things like vanilla, creamy, toffee apple, toffee crunch, chocolate fudge, white raisins and alcohol, light Jaffa cake, warm linen, hints of beeswax, hints of orange, has great length. And I also get, because it's been in the glass for such a long time, I get what in wine speak we call garrigue, which is mountain herbs. You just get that at the end. There's a lot of complexity there, but there's not weight. It's just wonderful, wonderful balance. Where it's made at Cameronbridge, Windygates, is quite interesting as well. There's a hospital there. It used to be an infectious disease hospital, but none of the viruses escaped into the whiskey. It's anyway, the alcohol would have killed the viruses anyway, so it's you're quite safe from that. And the hospital was, a part of it was at one time the family home of one of the Hague family. Now, the Hagues are very, very important in whiskey, also in Cameronbridge, because they owned the distillery at one time. And they also were cousins to a fellow called Steen, or Stein, call him what you want, Steen. And he was the first to make this the continuous still, which is where we have grain whiskey. And the grain whiskey, you've probably heard this before, is different from malt in that it's continuous. So you don't have to keep on, as long as you feed the bottom, it will keep on going. It's like the magic porridge pot. You start it and it doesn't finish. And it comes off at a slightly higher alcoholic strength. So it's lighter, and therefore it can take flavors more readily than something which is already oily and heavy. This is finished in Marsala, so it's not been aged for 22 years in Marsala, because I think then it would probably be slightly overkill. It's cask strength, quite delicious. I've put 2 glasses, actually 3 glasses, one neat, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I don't mean to be condescending, because I have 5 daughters and I am blessed amongst women. I find it quite feminine in a really positive sense. It's wonderful. When I add water to it, its cask strength, I'm a little bit disappointed. It's just, it still has the notes, but it gives out then a slightly bitter note, which I really don't like. Quite prickly, and it dries out. It doesn't have the richness and the lushness that you get from the non-watered stuff. And then I've got a little glass, for those who can see it, and this is Marsala from, there were 2 or 3 families in Marsala, the city of Marsala, who made the Marsala wine. And the most important one now is Florio. And for those of you that like cars and things, you might have heard of the Targa Florio, which was the Florio plaque. And it was a mad race around bits of Sicily, an endurance race long before Le Mans. And the Florio family patronized this and gave the shield and subsidized it. And the other one is a Curatolo, which is the one I have in front of me because I can't get Florio anymore. And I'm just smelling it. And you can see the color is not dissimilar to the James Eadie one. Can you see this? Quite similar. So I've given you my connection with it. I've given a little bit of the background. I think it's a fantastic whiskey. I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I chose the bottling and whatnot, but a beautiful whiskey. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll pass you over to Hugh.
Thanks very much for that, Vince. That was fascinating. So I'm just going to talk to you about how Marsala then sort of plays into James Eadie's history. If anyone who doesn't know us, we're an independent bottler blender, which first started by James Eadie in 1854, but was revived by his great-great-grandson, my boss Rupert, in 2016. And the key to sort of the revival is his ledgers. So Rupert found James Eadie's ledgers, which basically stated everything he bought during his lifetime and whilst working as a brewer. And we found the recipe for our blend, the Trademark X, and Cameronbridge is one of the grains in our whiskey. And then also we found that he was buying lots of grain and malts, but in weird and wonderful casks, which helped us set up our cask finish range. So that's sort of started in 2017. And this bottle here, Cameronbridge, Cameronbridge here is because we found that he actually bought 50 casks of Cameronbridge all in Marsala between 1891 and 1898. So for 7 years, he was just only buying a lot of grain, but the majority of it was Cameronbridge in Marsala. So this sort of caught our attention in the ledgers, and we sat down and we said, well, there hasn't really been a grain finished whiskey in the market for a long time. So we were really, really keen to sort of experiment with it. It was sort of a top secret between the 3 of us. We sort of didn't tell anyone about it because, you know, it was a bit of a risk. So as it was maturing, we were checking it every 3 months to see how it was coming along. And we saw it was developing really nicely, but we just didn't know when to bottle it. And then we got an email from the team at the Fife Whisky Festival being like, would you like to be the official bottling? Do you have anything that we can sort of try and see if Luvians would like it as well? And it just sort of stood out to us to sort of unveil this grain finish, our first ever grain finish, a Cameronbridge at the Fife Whisky Festival, finished in an Italian wine, which is going to be sold by Luvians, was just the perfect way to sort of reintroduce it into the world. So we are absolutely delighted. The only thing was to send it off to the team at Luvians to try it, and luckily they came back and they said they liked it. I remember when I was doing this talk at the Lindell's Abbey last year, it was sort of the first time I actually seen it after it being filtered, and the first thing that I realised was it actually looked a bit like Iron Brew in the colour. So that there, it was just amazing. So it sort of all links back to sort of Scotland and what people love. So we were absolutely delighted to sort of bring this to the Fife Whisky Festival, and to sort of just, as I said before, just to recreate this sort of unusual whiskey. We've been doing finishing malts for a few years now, so to do it with this grain with you guys was absolutely fantastic. And I agree. I think grain gets gets a hard rap. People don't like grain; they just want single malt. They want old single malt. But it's just wonderful to put this interesting grain out there and show people that doesn't matter how old your whiskey is, doesn't matter if it's a blended Scotch or or a grain whiskey, whiskey's whiskey. So if it tastes great, then it doesn't matter where it's come from. So I think to do this hopefully shows you how versatile grain is and how delicious it is. And I agree with Vince. I haven't put any water in mine, and I think the nose and how sort of light it is, considering it's at 59, I think it's 59.8%. It's just a lovely, lovely sippable whiskey. And I hope you guys enjoy it, and then keep seeking out some more grain whiskies, because there's so many wonderful ones out there.
Can I just ask, are there any bottles left? Is there any bottles left for sale?
I think that's Vince's. Yeah.
I'll pass you on to Archie. He'll tell you.
Okay.
There aren't very many at all, because I like to keep some back just to show people.
Absolutely. That'll be good just for tonight. If anyone wants to, if anyone's looking for a bottle, then
there you are. Someone just said she's ordered 2, so there you are.
Fantastic. That's great. And I love your Italian accent when you put it on. When you obviously not when you put it on, because that's your natural accent, but I love your Italian accent, Vince. It really is fantastic. I could just listen to you all night talk about where you're from and Italy, and it's just lovely. So thank you for doing that. It's lovely.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
But a quick question to you, Vince. Have you noticed more and more people are coming into the shops and asking for single grain whiskey?
Not really, but I always try to steer them to it just as something not just different, but absolutely superb. I've always liked grain whiskey. As I say, for me, it is probably the feminine touch, and I don't mean that in any condescending way at all. I love women, so I think this is absolutely perfect. It's not for the faint heart, because it's a cask strength. But it's not aggressive, it's not bullish in any way. It is beautifully balanced. And that goes for most of the grain whiskies I have tried. It's always more beautifully balanced.
It is beautifully balanced. It's a lovely dram. It really is a nice, most people would, turn their noses up at a grain whiskey. They would go, oh no, I don't know, and have that snobbery about them in terms of single malts, etc., and things like that. But actually, this is just outstanding for me. I just love it. I don't know if you were on earlier, Vince, but we've raised over £700 for Age Concern Cooper.
May I say thank you to everyone, and just remember, my wee granny way back, I used to worry about her when I was teaching abroad. I used to go up and visit her. I used to worry about her. She's in her 70s. I said, well, no, don't worry about me. I've reached my age. If you're lucky, you will reach to it. So if we're all lucky, we will reach to a situation where we do not need, but can use Age Concern and bring people together. So it's a wonderful, wonderful charity. Thank you very much indeed.
No, I just wanted to update you just on where we were with it. But yeah, no, it's
brilliant.
And everyone here has been part of that. And I'm sure they'll be absolutely delighted helping.
Just another connection between Cameronbridge and Marsala. Marsala, it's slightly tangential. The Targa Florio is probably the oldest sports car race in the world. Okay, and Cameronbridge is probably the oldest, if not the oldest, certainly the second oldest grain distillery in the world. So there's a wee connection there as well.
So Graham has said, how long did it mature in the Marsala cask?
That's for Hugh to answer. Not you.
For
Hugh.
12 months.
12 months.
For 12 months. So it spent a whole year in there. And I think going back to sort of getting that balance, Vince mentioned it earlier that it hasn't obviously spent 22 years in a Marsala cask. So what we try and do with our cask finishing is to get that perfect medium between having the grain character with an influence of a Marsala cask. Because if it did spend any longer in it, then you'll start losing that Cameronbridge character. So the idea is to get that balance right, and with this grain and the sweetness of Marsala and that more sort of lighter grain style, we just thought it went really, really well. So so it spent 12 months in a first fill hogshead.
Leave with just one other connection between Marsala and Luvians. Okay, I also make ice cream, and what people call rum and raisin, in Italy, it's not rum and raisin. There might be rum essence. Here I actually use rum as well. But it is raisins steeped in Marsala wine, and it's called Malaga. Nothing to do with Malaga. It's called Malaga. So there's another reconnection between Fife and Marsala in Italy.
Lovely. I can't wait to go to Marsala when we can travel. I'm going to go. And
I can't wait to go to Luvians and get some ice cream.
Luvians first and then Marsala.
Okay, guys, so thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Vince. And I'm sure there'll be a few questions for you at the end.